Welcome back to Insights. I'm Aaron Parsegian, and I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. And Tim, we were just talking about the Republican national domination, it seemed like, over all these offices in the House and Congress. What do you think that is going to result in?
Well, it doesn't stop at the national level. I mean, the Republican Party right now controls, although they lost seats in the Senate, so it's not like the trajectory necessarily went in their total direction, but clearly with the presidency and maintaining the Senate, which most people didn't think they were going to be able to do, they control the legislative and executive branches still. And then there's all the talk about how the court may change, although a replacement of Scalia isn't going to really change that dynamic. It's what comes after that in the next...
I think a lot of people are worried about maybe Ruth Bader Ginsburg's retirement and stuff like that.
Right. But it's not just the federal level. It's Republicans control the majority of governorships in the country in all 50 states, and also both chambers of the legislatures in most states. So this is unprecedented since the 1920s. And it's also interesting, there's a parallel because the discrepancies of wealth in our society are unprecedented except for the 1920s, 1929 actually. And our discrepancies actually exceed those of the 1920s now. So, there's a lot of talk about a plutocracy, that sort of thing, the rule by the moneyed elites, appealing to the lower classes, pulling them into the sway. But what's really going to be interesting about this is to see if the proof is in the pudding in a reasonable amount of time. I think that we're ripe for it. We need something to give because the dynamic has become, quite frankly, frightening when you think about how this is playing out subconsciously in our fears and our anxieties and almost a paranoia. And then you add the political dynamic of all this, and that's just internally. What about the external threats that have a lot of people unsettled? So this is a really very critical period in our country's development. And I hope people are raising a consciousness that is cautious in the way that we move forward and we don't overstep. No one received a mandate. We need to find the middle ground that is workable and makes sense for a sustainable prosperity. And I want to believe that Trump will, with the right amount of guidance and pressure, whether it's internal or external, will help shape that. We have to believe that at this point.
And it was just obviously a wild campaign throughout the year. As a professor, what were you noticing in students? For the most part, I'm dealing with a population, half of whom can't vote yet, and the other half can. There was a sort of subdued quietness. It's almost a lethargy in a way. The millennials were not really excited. There was a little bit of talk, of course, that I heard from students about the Bernie campaign. Of course, there was a lot of Trump rah-rah, particularly when it was pretty clear that he was he got the nomination. I didn't see that so much prior to. Quite frankly, an obliviousness. We're not paying attention to this stuff for the most part. But my challenge is, of course, to raise consciousness and instill the importance of civics awareness and engagement. And what we did is focus on the congressional elections. I shifted their attention from the popular appeal, and we tried to understand what was going on with Congress, particularly the Senate, where the real race was, in our congressional district. And I was very impressed at how students, I feel like they really got the message and became aware in a much more holistic sense than just a preoccupation with this presidential election. And I think that's very important because we talked about how people only focus on the executive office, or at least the general public does. They don't understand what kind of consequences local offices and national offices like Congress have.
And I feel really good. Well, I think my students didn't really engage it initially. The end product was one. They met the challenge. And I think we're seeing this play out nationally. It's the younger generations that are out there now, engaging in these demonstrations. They're frustrated. Some of them are regretting that they didn't engage and vote. But they're also they're concerned about where this is going.
on both sides of the aisle, if you will. So I'm reassured, and I think the whole outcome of this is probably that we've got a higher level of consciousness about our national politics than we've seen in a while.
And like we said, there was demonstrations. There was obviously some at University of Michigan, Michigan State, schools all around the nation. Have you seen this kind of like a backlash to an election to this extent?
Not that I can recall off the top of my head. This is one of my favorite questions to people that are older than myself is, can you think of a scenario? I grew up in the Reagan era, and so I don't think we've had anything quite like this, this close of a popular vote type scenario that translated into a contradiction. The popular vote being different than the Electoral College vote has only happened 5 times in the history of our country, twice now in the 21st century, and one of those 5 is the Trump victory over Clinton. So, in a reaction other than the war initiatives that we've been engaged in and the reaction to the war on terror and whatnot, I personally haven't seen anything quite like this.
Oh, well, it's going to be interesting to follow. Tim, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And thanks for joining us. Join us back next week at the same time, same place for a new edition of Insights.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.